not just in places where we have American interests, but in the entire world.
That is truly my dream job.
Is this exciting?
Yes, this is amazing. We're out in the field. We're not just writing papers. We're in there.
Exactly.
Okay, that's just a little something to kind of get you thinking about different locations around the world and exotic foods and hard work in developing countries. So, just a couple of notes. There should be an iPad making its way around somewhere. Okay, yeah, if you could please just sign in with your name, email. You can fake everything else. I don't care. I don't call people. I don't turn up at your house, so I don't really need your address. But email would be very nice. That way, I'll send you something in the next couple of days with links to all of the things that we talked about today, because I'm going to cover a lot very quickly, and it's kind of good to have it in email form. Okay, as people are coming in, my name is Michelle Jones. I'm the diplomat in residence for the U.S. Department of State, and I'm based here at the Ford School. I travel a lot. I cover Michigan, Ohio, and Kentucky. In fact, I'm just back from a trip today to Western Michigan. And yeah, I left there about 4 o'clock, so if any of you are familiar with that drive, yeah, so it went pretty well, yeah. And last week I was in Ohio most of the week covering Columbus, Cincinnati. I'll go to Dayton next week, so you get the idea. I go out and talk to students, professional organizations, all kinds of people who are interested in the work that we do. Tonight I'm going to talk primarily about internships because I know that's how this session was advertised, but if any of you are interested in foreign service careers or fellowships, you're very welcome to try to catch me in my office, which is in 3216, just upstairs, or more likely send me an email and then we can figure out a time to meet. I also spend so much time in my car that I talk on the phone a lot, hands-free, as per US government regulations. One of the reasons, we have a diplomat in residence here, one in, Arizona, one in Oklahoma, in addition to the places you might expect, like DC, New York, and LA, is that Hillary Clinton says in the full-length version of the video that I just showed you, when she was secretary, her statement was, "I want a foreign service that looks like America." So the idea is that we want people who truly represent the United States and not just people from the East Coast and the West Coast. The Great Lakes region, the Midwest, we all should have a voice in determining our foreign policy and carrying it out overseas. Okay, I can answer questions as we go, but I know some of you have classes and other involvements later on. So I'm going to take a few minutes and talk about the internship process, and then we'll have time for questions. We have actually a couple of real, living, breathing U.S. Department of State interns with us tonight. Can you stand up and tell us a little bit about what you did and where and that kind of stuff?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Ruby. I was an intern this summer at the U.S. Embassy in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania. And so I worked in the public affairs office there.
That's my office, public affairs.
Public affairs. Is there anything else?
How did you find the application process? Was it good, difficult? Was it, bureaucratic?
I think that the actual application that you had to submit wasn't overwhelming or anything like that, as long as you kind of can be stressful if that deadline comes in. I know I have trouble with just letting it go and allowing it to kind of be what it is instead of obsessing over every little detail. And then from there, it's kind of very determined by the embassies I found for myself. My experience was actually slightly different in that I was an alternate for a long time, and then kind of through a crazy process, I actually got to go. But from what I've heard from other people that were in the same post, it's just another interview, and it's not anything too outrageous.
Okay, good,
So,
thanks.
what year are you and what's your education background?
Oh, okay, sure. I'm a junior this year. I just started in the Ford School.
Okay, and Alexandra?
And then, hi everybody, my name is Alexandra No. I'm a sophomore here at the University of Michigan. In addition to that, I am actually double majoring in international studies and Spanish, minoring in poli-sci. And I recently just accepted my internship with the U.S. Department of State a couple of weeks ago. My application process is a little bit different than I would say most application processes. So I actually vouched for this thing called Virtual Service Foreign Service. So basically that means you're doing an online internship in the comforts of your own home or wherever you choose to do so. And I can still stay in Ann Arbor, be a student, but in addition to that, I'll be doing internship work. And my role is a college student liaison. So similar to what Ms. Michelle Jones is doing now, I'll be able to speak and share opportunities with the U.S. Department of State.
Thank you very much. Okay, I'll go through kind of the nuts and bolts, but you two, if, you've gone through this a lot more recently than I have. Although, as part of the training, we all kind of went to the USAJOBS.gov website, looked at the application, so I'm pretty familiar with it. But you've actually applied successfully, and so you will probably have helpful hints about all of this. Okay, yeah, as Alexandra mentioned, she's doing something called the Virtual Student Foreign Service, and the one we're going to talk about right now is the Student Internship Program. Summer internships for 2016, the application process is open right now. And it closes October 16th. I strongly advise that you get your application in earlier rather than later, because on the last couple of days, last 48 hours, we get a huge rush of applications and the site has crashed once or twice. And that's just really stressful for everybody because you don't know if it's caught up in the ether somewhere or if it was successfully submitted. So please get it in, even just a couple of days early is very useful. Okay. It definitely is an intensive work experience, and lots of people worry about, oh gosh, I think an internship is going to be making photocopies and fetching coffee for the ambassador, or just what you hear about stereotypically as an intern experience. But you really do take an active part in the formulation and implementation of U.S. foreign policy, whether or not you are serving overseas or in the State Department in Washington, D.C., or the U.S. mission to the UN. Generally, spring is our biggest intake season for interns. We had about 1,000 this past summer, and it was split pretty evenly, 50-50 between domestic and overseas internships. We have a fewer number, about half that, I think, in spring and also in fall internship sessions. And yes, I guess this is kind of a fact of life with internships these days. They are unpaid internships. Okay, one of the ugliest buildings in Washington, D.C., so you won't fail to recognize it. That's the Department of State in maybe aptly named Foggy Bottom, Washington. Yeah, there are other facilities in the Washington, D.C. area, but this is sort of the mothership, or I guess the Death Star, depending on your point of view. There's the Foreign Service Institute, which, if you're familiar at all with our mission, we have to have training very frequently because we change jobs every 2 or 3 years. Foreign Service officers and specialists have lots of training. I've had language training twice at the Foreign Service Institute, 6 months the first time, 9 months the second time. And Foreign Service Institute also does all the training courses when you change jobs. So the first time I went out as a consular officer, I had lots of courses on U.S. immigration law, on fraud, on interviewing techniques, how to do a prison visit, which my mother still doesn't know. I actually did prison visits at one point in my career. So they can be anywhere in the Washington, D.C. area because State Department is so big, we have annexes sort of all over the place. Okay, some of the other cities in the U.S., if you have friends or family you can stay with for free, then that's a wonderful thing. And there's the Detroit Passport Agency. Last year they did not take interns. That could change. Any of these things are subject to change. But we had the U.S. mission to the UN in New York. We have a financial office in Fort Lauderdale, and then the rest are our passport offices. And overseas. All of our embassies, consulates, and missions are represented there by dots. So 250 different possible places you could go. Not everywhere in the world, of course, is on the list. We are not going to send you to a place that has a civil war or a high danger threat or a high infectious disease threat, anything like that. But most places in the world will accept interns, and I would urge you to think about places other than, you know, the typical London, Paris, Rome. Some of the students that I've worked with have had by far the best experiences possible in some of the smaller places or places that are a little more off the beaten path that you might not think about immediately. So, you know, London, Paris, Rome is all well and good, but if you want to go to Europe, you might want to think about Serbia or Croatia or Montenegro or, you know, somewhere that isn't always on television as a tourist destination. If you're interested in going to Asia, you know, possibly you could think about going to our embassy or one of our consulates in India, for example. South America, you see how many possibilities there are, and Mexico, you know, in addition to the main embassy, we have offices all over Mexico and Central America. Okay, the intern experience. Yeah, we actually quoted this from an intern last year. Katie says that she did not make photocopies, she didn't fetch coffee, she didn't refill office supplies. Maybe, can you tell us, Ruby, a little bit about what you did in the public affairs section?
Sure. I think my experiences in public affairs varied a lot over the course of the 9 weeks I was there. And I did, the one thing that I did that was very kind of office-y was that we had a big Independence Day event and we had to print 800 invitations to that. But it wasn't that they were here, intern, do all these things. It was everyone needs to do this job and it's all just part of the work that's happening. You know, so it never felt like it was targeted towards me. And then throughout the course of the whole time I was there, I also did, you know, I designed a poster show that was pictures and captions of the U.S.-Tanzania relations that was displayed at a big event. I went on a trip actually to the northern part of the country and talked about attending college in the U.S. as an international student, a student from Tanzania. So yeah, the public affairs department kind of does a very wide range of things, and I felt like I got to participate in that range of things. You know, they were very inclusionary and come to these meetings, come to these things, and see how everything really works. So it definitely was not just sitting there kind of twiddling my thumbs. So yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting some of the duties that interns, you know, because I'm based here, I talk more to U of M interns in more depth than I do interns at other schools. And I've had people do all kinds of things, from, you know, social media to, you know, if you have the language of the country to which you've been assigned, you can help out with translations, or in the case of one U of M intern, U of M State Department intern, he was able to interview people in his first language for the Human Rights Report. And the Human Rights Report, some of you might know, is a congressionally mandated report that comes out once a year. We base a lot of our foreign assistance on this. Countries get pretty ticked off with us if we, you know, relegate them to a tier that they don't think they deserve. So our foreign aid is based on it. NGOs work in country depends on it. The Senate, the House, and President Obama read the Human Rights Report. And yet we had an intern from U of M, you know, writing large parts of it in one overseas post. So people have done all kinds of things. Interns I've worked with in public affairs have also done a lot of the Education USA outreach. But I had one intern in Trinidad who was very interested in economics and energy policy. He ended up writing a major policy speech for the ambassador on U.S. Trinidad relations and the energy sector, because that was very much his area of expertise. Of course, I read it, you know, and edited it and so on, but He did the major bulk of the work on a big foreign policy speech. Okay, we have another one here who interned in Washington, D.C. at the Bureau of East Asian and Pacific Affairs. Yeah, you do go to a lot of meetings. You're included in a lot of official events like the 4th of July, but also sometimes you're the only American at a high-level meeting. Why is that? Because it's summer transfer season. And sometimes, you know, there just aren't people around, and so you need to represent the U.S., take notes, and report back to somebody in your office on what transpired at the meeting with the Minister of Higher Education. So, you know, don't think you're going to be, sitting around twiddling your thumbs. Okay, this is the eligibility. It's all pretty hard and fast. U.S. citizenship, you need to be an undergraduate or a graduate student, but the main thing is you need to be a continuing student planning to return to school after you complete the internships. 2.5 GPA, and you need to be able to get at least a secret security clearance. That's because some of the information you'll be handling or having access to is going to be confidential. So we need to know that, you know, you're going to use it wisely. Especially if you're in the consular section, you can imagine you're handling people's passports and their personal information. You may be privy to sensitive policy discussions as well. So, any questions so far? Yeah.
If you're a dual citizen, is that a problem?
The classic foreign service response to that is it depends. It depends on which country you're a dual national with, but most of the time we decide that on a case-by-case basis. If it's a country that has, what's the right word, a rather fraught relationship with the United States, then we will not send you to that country as an intern because it puts you under pressure to, you know, hey, will you take money to process this passport or this visa for me? But most of the time, it's not a huge issue. There's one in the back.
Do you guys provide any internships or fellowship opportunities for students that are going to graduate this undergrad?
I'm sorry?
For students that are planning on graduating this year?
As long as you plan to become a continuing student after that.
So if you already can prove that you're enrolled in a graduate program?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, or, you know, proof that you're planning to do that. Like, for example, I would think if you took the GRE or if you had applications pending. Yeah, in the back, and then I'll come
Yeah,
down.
two things. First of all, what's junior status? And second of all, when you say what's junior status? And second of all, how do you maintain a security clearance?
Okay, junior is 60 credit hours at least, completed by the time you take up the internship. So 60 credit hours by May or June 2016. Keeping and maintaining a security clearance means that you are trustworthy, that you don't have any, I suppose, skeletons in your closet that might make you subject to pressure when you're serving overseas. The most common things that come up among college students are, as you might imagine, illegal drug use, heavy debt that you have not addressed. I mean, student loans, of course. I had a student loan. President Obama had a student loan. It's not a big deal as long as you're not in default. DUIs are an issue. If you have one negative incident in your past and nothing has happened since then, it's probably not an issue. But if you have repeated incidents of, reckless or just plain stupid behavior, then you probably will not get a security clearance. Yeah?
If you're studying abroad for like the school year, are you able to do an internship? And if you're doing it for a full year, would you be able to do like continuous, maybe fall and spring or something like that?
It's possible, yeah. Sometimes people will be studying abroad in the country in which they want to do an internship, and so they do sort of a follow-on in that country. I mean, you have to apply for it and you have to get it cleared and everything else, but it is possible.
Would that be like within the, would you start that application process through the regular application?
Yeah, and just specify in your statement, which I'll get to in a minute, why you want to be in that particular country at that time. Yeah.
How important is it that you speak the language of the country you're going to?
It can help, but it's not a requirement by any means.
Will there be an opportunity to learn like basic conversational?
Right. Yeah, I would say if you have even a little bit of experience in the language of the country to which you're applying, mention that in the application. You know, if you're taking a class in that language and you have a basic knowledge, definitely mention that too. Yeah.
So with the application process, even at like the very beginning stage, you specify which country you're applying to, or do you look for applications for jobs in that country, or is there like a general form that you fill out to begin with?
Okay, I'll get to that, I promise, but it's a little bit complicated, so I kind of want my visuals to give me a way to cheat through it. Yeah?
So do graduate students have to be returning students too?
Yes, they have to be returning at least half-time, which for some people has been online courses and that kind of thing. Yeah, but you do have to be planning to come back. Okay, so those are the minimum requirements. But I can't stress enough the importance of reading all this stuff in advance and downloading the internship brochure. I brought a few paper copies with me, but I think what is online is a lot more user-friendly instead of leafing back and forth, although this is a good visual aid for me to use when I'm talking. What we ask you to do is to select a first and a second choice from regional and functional bureaus. What does that mean? Okay, keep in mind, I'll try to talk you through this slowly because it is complicated, and you know how bureaucracies kind of develop their own language over time. All right, somebody name a country. A country.
Spain.
Spain, okay. Somebody wants to go to Spain, okay. We have the world divided up into 5 different regional bureaus. So Spain is in a bureau called EUR for European Affairs. Another country.
South Africa.
Where? South Africa? Somebody said? Okay, South Africa is in, you might have guessed, AF, the African Bureau. Let's see, India, SCA, South Central Asia. So not to belabor this, but the people who govern SCA, WHA, ER, EUR, AF, and so on are the ones that you'll be corresponding with in the course of deciding who gets which internship where in the world, okay? But you also have, in the case of people who want to go to Washington, D.C., functional bureaus. Somebody name me an important bilateral issue between the U.S. and some other country.
South Korea.
Climate change?
Climate change. What else?
The Syrian conflict?
Okay, Syrian conflict.
Korean border conflict.
I'm sorry?
Korean border conflict.
Korean War conflict, conflicts in general.
Data privacy, human rights.
Human rights, the right to privacy.
Somali
Drug overflow.
Drug overflow, drug trafficking, narco trafficking. Okay, I promise you, it might be called a slightly different thing, but we have a bureau for probably every one of these things that you yelled out in the Department of State in Washington, D.C. We have an office that covers climate change, you know, trafficking in persons, LGBT rights, global women's issues, oh gosh, what else is there? Nuclear nonproliferation, counterterrorism. There's an art bank program if you're an art major. Bureau of Conflict and Stabilization Operations. Okay, you get the idea. We cover a lot of different possible topics. So chances are, if you are very, very passionate about an issue and you want to learn about it in depth, we will have a bureau or an office that deals with it. When you go to apply, okay, this looks like a nightmare on paper, right? It's these columns and they have dots. Okay, our smart people in IT in Washington came up with a nice drop-down menu. So all you do now is simply type in your major, and the drop-down menu tells you which bureaus or which regions might be taking interns in your subject area. This is always subject to change. We don't know what's going to happen in the future. You know, we had interns running around Ukraine until a few years ago. We had interns assigned to West African countries, which we'd been doing for years until the Ebola crisis sort of blew up, and so we had to relocate. So this is all with a caveat, anything could happen. It's kind of like when I first joined the Foreign Service and we got our first assignments, we were all very jealous of the guy who got assigned to Fiji, because we thought, you know, that's going to be a piece of cake assignment, nice beaches, you know, what could be going on in Fiji? He got off the plane, and 2 weeks later there was a coup. Shooting in the streets, all kinds of stuff going on. It was his very first job, and you know, he ended up working 18-hour days, and so yeah, we weren't so jealous after that. So, not that a coup is going to erupt where you are, but just anything.
Sorry, so basically you're saying that we choose a maximum of 2
Yes.
between the regional and the functional?
That's right, yeah. So if you decide, look, I need to stay in DC because it is an unpaid internship and I can, you know, crash on my friend's floor. If you want to do that, I've known people who did. If you know somebody there, you want to work at the U.S. mission to the UN in New York because you know somebody there, then you would apply for a domestic internship. But yeah, other than that, you would list your top 2 bureaus that you want to work at, or you would list the top 2 countries where you would like to work. Yes?
So they're all unpaid?
Yes. They are all unpaid. And I'll talk about how people handle that in a second. Yeah?
This might be what you're about to talk about, but do they provide assistance in finding housing?
Yes, that was, in fact. Okay, the way it works is if you are assigned an internship that is somewhere other than Washington, D.C. or Western Europe, we try to help you find housing. Sometimes that's, you know, a house-sitting situation. I've had interns do that for me when I've been in the U.S. on home leave. Sometimes it's temporary. Most embassies have temporary apartments for people who just come to do temporary duty for a few days or weeks. What was your housing situation?
My housing situation was that they had an embassy house that was kind of between foreign service officers, so I lived there. There were 2 kind of like mirror houses, and I lived in that complex with the other interns that were at the embassy or at USAID, because, you know, if I tried to find my own housing in Dar, it would be incredibly dangerous, and I obviously don't have anyone on the ground that I can do anything with, so yeah, they provided housing for us that was, you know, secure and safe and you know, good housing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's typically the case in countries outside Western Europe. In Western Europe, it's because of the sheer number of interns we have, and also in DC, that, you know, it's only a 10-week experience. We can't be placing several hundred students in temporary accommodation in DC or Western Europe. Yeah.
For the countries in which they try to provide housing, is the intern required to pay for that housing? Or
No. Nope. And that's because sometimes we ask you to move once or twice in the course of your assignment. Because, yeah, it's foreign service transfer time, and so everybody tends to move at the end of the school year, so a house might be empty for a summer, but somebody might come in a little bit early, so you go on somewhere else. Yeah.
Is there usually just one intern in a regional office, or are there several so they can kind of hang out with each other?
It varies a lot. In Trinidad, which is a very small country, there was only 1 intern in the whole embassy. I was looking at the list today. I think we had 15 in Barcelona, maybe 12 or 13 in London. There are, of course, lots and lots in Washington, D.C., but it very much depends on the size of the embassy. Some embassies are very small with a very small staff, and others are huge. So, but you know, if there's a specific one you're interested in, I can give you some information on that. Okay. Well, it's, you know, pointless to sign up for Keep Me Informed because the applications are open right now, so you can skip that step. But if you're interested in interning in spring or in fall, signing up for Keep Me Informed makes good sense. When the vacancy is open, as it is now, you need to go to USAJOBS.gov. Are you all more or less familiar with USAJOBS? Okay. I know this sounds like a no-brainer, but follow the instructions. We lose, not physically lose, but people's applications aren't successful because they've skipped a step where they haven't uploaded their transcripts, or something vital is missing, and we can't evaluate people on information that we don't have. Okay. Yes.
Just a quick question. Does non-competitive eligibility play a role in this? Like, if you have that, is that?
In the internships, I don't believe so, but I can check on that.
Okay.
From Peace Corps?
Yeah, Peace Corps.
Okay. I can check on that. I honestly don't know. But shoot me an email and I'll find out. Yeah.
So are the applications housed at careers.state.gov or USAJOBS.gov?
Careers has a link and lots of information, and then the link takes you to USAJOBS.
Okay.
And that's because the process of figuring out where you want to go is a little more complex than what can be handled on USAJOBS. Yes?
If you hold another security clearance for another agency, does that also apply for this? You just roll that over or something?
It definitely helps. I think they have to, what's the right word? I keep thinking rejuvenate,
Okay.
reactivate.
Yes.
It's not as complicated as getting one from scratch, so
Okay.
it does speed things up considerably if you already have a security clearance. Yeah?
So since we can apply to two countries, if you don't end up being placed in those countries, would they ask you to go to a different country? Or?
Sometimes that happens, yeah. Yeah, on occasion, they may ask you to go, or ask you if you're interested in another country in the same region that might have similar issues. Every once in a while, an internship just is not available because maybe the supervisor went back to the US early and can't work with you, or some other reason that has nothing to do with you. So they say, well, you said you were interested in Bolivia, how about Peru? They have something available.
Are you able to apply for like one domestic internship and one international one?
I think this year we're making it so it has to be either or,
Okay.
either domestic or international. Yeah.
Do you get a list of the internships, like posts that are open in different countries, or do we just apply and just hope that there is a post there?
I can give you advice on that, but most of the ones that you think would not be available to interns won't come up on the drop-down list. The information is as up-to-date as we can possibly make it, but yeah, it might change over time, just because things happen in the world. Okay, where am I? Okay. I guess this is the place where I'll talk about doing your research and how important it is. Ruby, tell us how you happened upon Dar es Salaam.
Well, I am actually interested in African politics, and I take classes here at the university in Swahili, which is the language that I speak in East Africa. But I definitely went and looked at the embassy website and saw if they were involved in issues that I was interested in, or had offices that I was interested in. Yeah, so it wasn't a completely random place, but it definitely took some confirmation, because it very easily could have been that it was just some tiny little embassy that, I was interested in something slightly bigger, but Dar is a very big city, and it worked out.
Yeah, and because, okay, you saw that we do about 1,000 internships every summer. The Office of Student Programs is only 2.5 full-time people in Washington, D.C. That's a lot of interns to place from scratch, so we kind of ask you to do the legwork and figure out your top 2. So you tell us where you would like to go, instead of us reading your application and saying, oh, she sounds like a good match for Tanzania. You tell us, and then we make sure that there's an opening there, and if you're one of the interns that is highly ranked, then you'll get an internship in that place. I guess I cannot stress enough the importance of doing your research. You go to U of M, you're smart people, you know this, but I've seen internship applications that were really obvious cut and paste from other internship applications. The first line says something like, I would be honored to represent my country by interning at the CIA. You go, what? And you're completely confused, and then you realize, he just didn't bother to go back and edit. And then, have a good reason for why you want to intern in that country, or to work on that issue. You know, you don't want to be like the notorious student. I've talked about her 5 times today, but her first line was something like, "I'm willing to serve at the U.S. Embassy in Paris because I have high school French and I love to shop." You know, I wanted to run screaming out of the room. You really want to convince, it's not me, it's actually the panel in Washington, D.C., that you're a good candidate for this and that you've done your research and you're interested in the issues, that you have at least a passing acquaintance with what's going on in that country, and that, you know, your classes or your outside reading or your volunteer work has prepared you to take up this internship. So, you know, just do your research. Probably the best way to do that is to go to the embassy webpage for the country that you're interested in. And, you know, it doesn't take very long. Just, what has the ambassador spoken about? There's sometimes a section that says key points, and you can look at that and see, you know, what's being talked about at this embassy. When I worked in Trinidad, you know, we had the big 3. It was drug trafficking, climate change was increasingly big, and corruption. And, you know, the Department of State has the same mission at its heart all over the world, which is to protect American citizens and American interests, and to promote democracy and human rights. But based on the country in which you're serving, that can take different forms. You know, you have countries like Bangladesh that are literally disappearing off the map because of climate change, where the issue is much more urgent or much more prioritized than maybe in other parts of the world, although it's an issue that's going to affect every single person in the world sooner or later, probably sooner. So the statement of interest is the most important piece of writing in the entire application process. I mean, you know, a 2.5, okay, it's great, it's fine, it's not a stellar GPA. It's important because we want to know you haven't failed your classes, but really what you've done in your research and what you've said in your statement is far, far more important than your GPA. And, you know, it sounds kind of self-centered for the Department of State to say, what can you do for us? But that's really what we're looking for. We know it's going to benefit you in your future career, but we really want to know, how can you help us? If you're really good at social media, if you have a language skill, if you have military or Peace Corps experience that's relevant to the position you're applying for, you know, if you've taken a class in that country and done a lot of research, any related experience, it doesn't have to be academic. If you're interested in working on refugee issues and you volunteer with a refugee relief organization here, you know, definitely mention that. Don't think that it doesn't count because it's not overseas. We really want to know that you have a commitment to this issue and you're not doing it just because you want to go overseas for 10 weeks and have a good time, or party it up in DC for 10 weeks on no money. That's kind of hard to do. But. Okay, but specific skills, that's important. And it is kind of like, I don't know, childbirth. It's 9 months. The whole process takes 9 months, and then at the end you have a well, I'm not going to say wonderful, you have a great end result, let's say. And it might, it's not as painful as childbirth, but it's lengthy, and there are lots of things that you have to kind of keep track of. So we had issued the announcement, which we did a few weeks ago, then 6 to 7 months prior to the application deadline, October 17th, I'm sorry, that gives you an extra day for summer. Oh, that's last year, okay, it is October 16th. 5 months prior, you may or may not have an interview. I know it's kind of weird to think it's not standardized, but some offices make an offer based completely on paper. Other offices call you up and give you a lengthy interview. Some people call you up and say, hi, we really want to hire you, but I just thought we should chat. So it just depends on the person in charge of you. What happened with you, Ruby?
What happened with me was very interesting in terms of, as I said at the beginning, I was on the alternate list, specifically for Tanzania, not just in general. You know, it's not that they're just going to put you anywhere. And so in December, I got an email from the HR officer in DAR asking for an interview at a time. I got it very early in the morning. It was probably, the interview was, he wanted it to be scheduled for that morning, and I had class. And then by the time that we tried to figure out the time that we could actually do the interview, he kind of said that he didn't need it anymore. I don't know exactly what happened with that, but I know that the other intern that was in the DAR office did have a full interview with him.
Yeah.
It just so happened
You just knocked
that,
him out on paper, apparently.
yeah, I think that they just decided based on whatever it was that they were going to have me as an alternate, and then it wasn't until finals week of winter semester that I got an email that something happened and there was an opening, and still not exactly clear. So my process was a little bit different, but the embassy that I was at did technically do interviews, but even between, so she was in the political economics section, I was in public affairs, and I think that those sections decided that, they really wanted an interview and they didn't feel that they needed one for me in the end. So even within an embassy, it can kind of differ based on who is
individual
doing
preference,
it.
or how much time they have, or how comfortable they are with what they see on paper. Yeah.
What is the timeline for the actual internships? Like, what constitutes summer and fall? And I know that sounds kind of basic.
No. It actually, the start date can vary. Okay. They do intakes in. Did you have processing in DC before you went out, or did you just went out?
Yeah.
That's for the DC interns have a big group meeting where they kind of process, but because everybody's school all over the US ends at a different date, we have sort of rolling.
Okay.
So, Michigan might let out earlier than Illinois, and so all the Michigan interns are kind of starting at the same time. The internships are a minimum of 8 weeks and a maximum of 12. 10 is pretty average. And spring and fall, again, it depends on when your school lets out. Spring is actually what I would think of as winter semester, so January to April kind of time frame. And fall is right now, September to maybe November or so. Yeah.
Do you specify if you want the 8 to 12, or does the embassy identify if the internship will be between 8 to 12?
We want you for as long as we can get you, but in reality, sometimes by the time you get a security clearance, there are only 10 weeks left or something like that. So, yeah, we like to have you for the maximum amount of time, but it doesn't always work out that way. Or your housing might only be available for 9 weeks instead of 10.
So pretty much you guys determine the length.
Yes, yeah. Although, I've had other people stay 12, even 13 weeks when they didn't have to be back at school right away. So it's very flexible.
Yeah. I would add to that quickly that from my experience, they kind of just asked me what dates worked best for me. And there was a date in August that I needed to be home for a big family event. So I said, that's kind of definitely my end date. And when do you want me to come within this time frame? And they told me a day that, I was going to come a week earlier, and then they were saying we're having this big kind of regional conference, and it's just too much to have a new intern kind of try to start that week, come the next week, and figure it out. So they definitely were very, at that point, you're communicating directly with someone in the embassy that's going to probably be your boss or your supervisor. But it was very, up to that negotiation and just figuring out what specific dates work best for you.
Thanks. Is the laptop or the iPad still going around somewhere? Okay, good. Yeah. You don't want me to get fired for losing track of it. So, yeah, I know it's slow. Just do the best you can. Let's see. Yeah, and it's only doing a security clearance takes time, and it's expensive for State Department to employ an investigator and go through all the paperwork. So we don't actually have you start the security clearance process until you've made a successful application and sometimes been offered a place. So we email you, I probably work like this with you, we email you and say, okay, congratulations, your application was successful, you're a primary or alternate candidate. Here are some fingerprint forms we want you to take to the local police station and then send back to us. Is that kind of how it worked for you?
Yeah, I have to take fingerprints for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a whole online
Yeah, there's a very long form that all of us fill out when we want to get a security clearance. It's nothing you probably wouldn't expect. It's people who know you well, where you've worked, where you've gone to school, any criminal convictions, that kind of stuff. So it's pretty straightforward. But it can take some time, especially if you have a lot of foreign travel, because they need to check out that travel. So that can slow it down a little bit. Okay, yeah, this is translated as, you know, don't quit your day job. Don't make plans you can't change based on the fact that you may or may not be getting this internship. Don't buy your tickets. Don't do anything, you know, sell your house, break up with your significant other, whatever, whatever you plan on doing, you know, because you're going to find somebody better in Spain or whatever. Don't do that until your security clearance is complete, because what if something happens and then you have to go back, you know, I'll hang dog and say, I'm sorry, I didn't really mean to break up with you. I'm not going to Spain after all. Or, you know, shell out $1,000 for a plane ticket that's non-refundable. No, please don't do that. Okay. Financing the internship, yes, it's expensive. There's no two ways about that. Airfare, lodging in some places, as I explained, and food. Yeah, and some overseas posts do offer housing, as I said. The other thing is many universities have some sort of funding, particularly if it's part of your program, to do an overseas or a DC internship. They'll have funding, they'll have a scholarship, they may have a little stipend, something like that. I've had students get funded through Rotary Club or a church or a synagogue or a community organization. So, you know, kind of cast a wide net when you're looking for money. That's kind of important. Lots of sources out there, it's just a matter of figuring it out. And you might want to talk to your department and figure out if they do, in fact, finance. Yes, Bill?
In terms of funding, I just wanted to mention the session coming up on October 7th.
Good timing.
Funding for internships and research abroad, and this is funding available from University of Michigan units to support internships abroad. The university gives out $2 to $3 million every year to support internships abroad, so there's a lot of funding available. Some of it is need-based, some of it is merit-based. But most people who apply for funding, well, I can't say that, but many people who apply for funding are able to get it through the university.
That's great. Not every school does that, so you guys are special. What else? Oh, if you have a Pell Grant, if you're on a Pell Grant, you can also apply for something called a Gilman Scholarship, and that helps you cover the costs associated with an overseas or a DC internship. Oh, there it is. Okay. Okay, that's the quick version, and as I said, as long as I have your email address, I can send you more information. I have some booklets up here, I have some handouts. Department of State loves these because they have lots of information, but they're very environmentally friendly. Lots of information on really only a couple of sheets of paper. I'm happy to take more questions, concerns, whatever else you might, wow, okay. Sorry.
Over here, I think our broadcast.
Is the iPad still going around somewhere?
Oh, yeah, we haven't gotten it.
Okay, if you have to leave and you haven't signed in, can you please hit that up on your way out? Yeah.
Could you explain a little bit about the pathways internship program and how it differs from this one?
Yes. Anybody want to know about Pathways? Okay. Pathways is an internship program that is paid, and it is mostly based in Washington, D.C. There are a couple of different versions of it. One is called the Recent Graduates Program. You have to have graduated from an accredited institution within the last 2 years. And these are entry-level jobs in the federal government. State Department runs Recent Graduates, but every other federal agency also participates. So if you go on USAJOBS and look in the search bar under Recent Graduates, it'll have jobs at, you know, Fish and Wildlife, CIA, Smithsonian, NASA, you know, every agency you could possibly think of. And you can actually sign up to get an alert when a recent graduate opening is available. For us, they're almost exclusively passport office openings. And those would be at one of the 16 different passport offices that I showed on the map. Those are pretty labor intense and they're limited to 2 years. But after those 2 years, you can convert to the civil service. And you're in the federal government pipeline is the beauty of the recent graduates program. You have a GS ranking, you have a clearance, and you're in a position to hear about openings, whereas you might not hear about them in as much detail or as quickly when you're not kind of there on the ground. We also have the Internship Temporary Experience Program, ITEP, and that is designed for students who are able to go and work in Washington, D.C. at the State Department. Summer vacations, winter vacations. I have a couple of students from Wayne State, actually, in Detroit, who have family in D.C., so they go stay with their family and work in D.C. on their time in between classes. And that, again, it's on careers.state.gov, but it's under student programs. I think it's not under internships. Yeah.
For students interested in doing the internship along with study abroad, is it possible to work with the embassy to see if you could do like part-time?
It's possible to see if you could negotiate that, but I think they're pretty hard and fast about these being 40 hours a week thing. Yeah. Way in the back.
So the application deadline is October 16th. And
Yes.
You said it's a long 9-month process.
Yes.
So when would we hear back if our application was accepted? And then I know the security clearance, but I guess my personal interest is in the graduate program requires a summer internship.
Okay.
So in theory, I wouldn't put all my eggs in one basket, that I would apply to other programs.
That's a really
as
good
well.
idea, yeah.
And then, well, I hate to say it, but if I chose something else.
Well, no, it happens.
Can I back out? I mean.
Yes, you can.
How does that work?
You usually hear something definite, December, January?
Yeah, I heard the end of January.
Okay, yeah, it's usually December, January, you're told pretty definitively if you're a primary, alternate, or kind of out of luck. So I would say keep applying for different things all down the line. Just so you kind of know, in summer, generally 1 in 8 applicants is successful. In fall and spring, it's about 1 in 4, because far fewer people try in those seasons.
So if you're a sophomore now, just keep this in the back of your mind.
Yes, yeah. I think that's a good thing to do, and actually, you can apply for the virtual student internship when it comes open. That's usually in the spring. I think as long as you're a continuing student, it doesn't matter if you're a sophomore status.
If you're currently a sophomore, you can start in the summer.
Yeah, it's all the credit hours. Are you currently a sophomore? Okay, so you're gonna have 60 hours by summer?
Yeah.
Yes. You'd still be okay. You can still apply.
Like summer, like this.
Summer 2016.
Yeah, like I applied my sophomore year.
Oh.
So you can apply your sophomore year because you're technically a junior when you do a summer internship.
Yeah, rising sophomore is the phrase that they use in DC. Yeah.
2 questions. I think I just missed, you just said for the summer programs, what are the usual odds of like acceptance?
1 in 8 for summer, 1 in 4 for the other 2 cycles, spring and fall.
Okay, and also, what if you're interested in, a lot of different foreign policy issues and you really would be interested in going to a lot of different countries? Is there a way to figure out maybe what you have a better chance of getting into rather than like say 50 people apply to Germany but 10 people apply to Croatia?
I can give you an educated guess, but the thing is, it changes every year. I do know, this sticks out in my mind, that last year we had 1 position in the Bureau of Counterterrorism and 80 applicants. And I don't know why, I think counterterrorism just sounds good to people, it sounds exciting, and they don't look at things that, other bureaus that do virtually the same work, but have maybe titles that aren't as attractive. Nuclear nonproliferation does a lot of the same work. Bureau of, this sounds boring, but they do really exciting work. Stability operations, CSO, they're engaged in stabilizing countries that are not stable. So They do a lot of the same kinds of work, but it just doesn't have a title that grabs people's attention. I would say it's probably a really good idea to look at places outside of London, Paris, and Rome. I do know this too, I just looked at the list from last year. Foreign Service Institute has lots and lots of internship positions. It's based in Arlington, it's our training institute, but you know, you could help out with, if you're interested in education and particularly how adults learn. I mean, I started learning a brand new language for the first time when I was close to 40 years old. So adults learn a different way. If you're interested in issues like that, language training, functional training, fraud, all those things that we teach. We don't teach fraud, we teach how to detect fraud at the Foreign Service Institute. But you know, that might be worth looking into, some of the courses that are run there. Yeah, I think FSI, Foreign Service Institute, was a little bit undersubscribed because people don't really understand what they do. Cast a wide net. You also may want to go to countries that are, you know, not the immediate ones you think of if you're planning an exotic vacation.
Can I add to that quickly? I would say also look at the specific time period that you're looking at going. So, you know, Tanzania is having their general election in October, and so it's very possible that they're not going to take interns for the fall semester because there's going to be so much happening in that embassy that, you know, it might just not be a good time for them. So if there are like really giant events that are happening, or
the Olympics.
Yeah, things like that that just are going to complicate things. You know, that's not like a rule about anything. You know, it's possible that Tanzania is still taking interns. I don't know, but you know, not just like it's generally a stable country, but what's happening during the time that you're looking to apply.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah, have a look at major events that are coming up. Elections, the Olympics, the World Cup of Cricket. You know, that all those things draw huge crowds, and it is work to supervise an intern. And if you're preoccupied with, you know, what am I going to do in this elections meeting, you won't get such a great experience. So, you know, we're only human too.
If we're studying abroad this winter, how does the security clearance work?
You mean, will it slow it down?
I mean, like, so like I'm going to Australia in February, and I just asked Ruby, and she said that she cannot finish her stuff in February. So, are you able to finish the security stuff if you're out of the country?
Yeah, I mean, it's not easy, but you can do it. If you get everything in early, yeah, we've had people overseas for various reasons who were able to complete their security clearance. Mostly they'll be talking to people other than you know. Did he live quietly? What were his personal habits? No, nothing like that. Just, you know, are you a good student? Do you pay your bills on time? That kind of stuff. They run a credit check, so you don't necessarily need to be present for that.
Do interns generally like have the same responsibilities? I mean, obviously taking into account the different programs that you'll be in, but do they usually have the same like jobs that they need to be doing? Like while abroad or while in DC?
No, they vary a lot, depending on the embassy and also your personal preference. And sometimes, you know, it depends. When I worked with interns myself, I would say, so what are you interested in? The guy who said economic issues, I said, great, the ambassador has this huge speech on energy policy coming up, so can you do all the research and write a draft for me? Because it was not something that I felt very qualified to write about. And he was an econ, you know, expert in that field. He'd done a lot of classes, knew the terminology, and so that was his area. Oftentimes your supervisor will say, what do you want to work on? Are you an extrovert? Do you like going out and meeting people? Or would you rather sit in the office and do research? You may need to kind of take charge of that yourself and say, these are the kinds of things I want to work on. Tell us how that worked for you.
My supervisor, I think, was incredibly sensitive to making sure that I was doing like valuable work and work that I was interested in for the entire time I was there. But I still think that in the 9 weeks I was there, none of it was the same, kind of from start to finish.
Yeah.
So, you know, like I said, I designed that presentation because that's something that the DCM really needed to have happen. And then I organized an event for young entrepreneurs to do this webinar series. And then I designed a presentation on education in the US that I then presented to, like, I think it was over 2,000 Tanzanian high school students. So, you know, that's something, education was the issue that I kind of said to them that I was very interested in. And so that's one of the big projects that I did. But also, in the meantime, you know, I did little side projects on people with albinism or wildlife trafficking or, you know, whatever kind of the issues are in the office. So there really was never like 1 week that I was doing the same thing that I was even doing the week before. And, you know, from just the other intern that I mentioned that was there, she was doing something completely different. And so it's really like your conversations with your supervisor and what the embassy focuses on. You know, like she said, it's the goals of the State Department are very broad. So like our ambassador was incredibly interested in wildlife trafficking. So that was a focus of the embassy, even though it's not, you know, one of the very specific goals of the State Department. So it's a lot of variation, but all, you know, incredibly interesting, I thought, for myself.
Yeah, and I think that's pretty typical. It does change. Yeah, I mean, that's one of the things I like about my job is that it's different every day, but you can never really plan very much. Yeah.
Have you ever had an intern that is placed in a country where he or she does not speak the native language? And if so, would that intern work with someone who speaks English?
Yes. You know, keep in mind, even at the embassy, the Americans are in a minority. So, for example, in Afghanistan, my section was 8 Americans and 25 Afghans. We all spoke English to each other. You know, some of us who, I had learned the language, so I tried to practice it as much as I could. But in order to be hired at the American embassy, they need to speak English at an adequate level. When you're going out and about, sometimes you'll need to take an interpreter with you, and I've had to do that, and so I have an intern sometimes. You know, my intern in Bangladesh who spoke about education in the United States and what it was like to be a woman studying in the US, because she mostly spoke to young women, had to use an interpreter who traveled with us. But it was still very valuable for the girls to see somebody their own age was getting a college education, and she talked about her background, which was, you know, kind of blue collar, and how people in the US, if they got a scholarship, could study. So, but yeah, all through an interpreter. Okay, stunned you into silence with all this information. Yeah, one more.
So what is the name of the website we go to when we want to start applying?
Careers.state.gov.
Is that where the drop-down menu is to that you mentioned?
Yeah, it should be. Other thing, you know, I ran out of handouts here, but I have tons in my office. I'm going to be around, let's see, I'm only on the road one more day this week, so I should be around quite a bit. If you're desperate to talk to me about something, you know, just shoot me an email. I'd prefer you use DIR North Central at state.gov rather than my eMish address, because I don't check that one as often as I do my State Department. Yeah, DIR North Central, all one word, at state.gov. That's the best way to reach me. And you know, if you discover somebody else in this room wants to talk to me about internships, maybe we could schedule a common time to meet and have coffee or something like that. But I'm happy to answer questions and maybe even refer you to other interns who have gone through the process and might have useful information for you. Because I can talk about it in theory, but it really does help to have somebody here who has been through the process and served overseas. And we have our virtual intern who has also gone through the process. So nothing like hearing it straight from the source. Yes?
What's a virtual intern exactly?
I'll explain that. So It's basically, you still work with the US State Department, but you don't have to get a security clearance, and you don't actually have to have like a junior status required. You just have to make sure that you are a student and that you're continuing your time through like the university or at the graduate level. So basically for the virtual internship, you just stay wherever you're at. You don't have to move to DC, you don't have to move abroad, but you still get assigned work as if you would if you were just there abroad. So I'm a college student liaison, where I'll be sharing different opportunities with college students, whether it's at information sessions just like this, career fairs, or different international opportunities fairs. So I actually have my own supervisor that I still have to talk to almost on a daily basis to see what I can do to keep my job going, to keep this internship at work. But it's actually a similar application, but you have to fill out different requirements for each one that you want. One thing that I noticed that was different between the summer internship and with the virtual students one is that you actually get to choose between 3. You apply at most of 3, and then you can really pick different departments to choose to. Luckily for me, I applied all within the State Department, and then I still got the State Department, but you can apply up to 3, you can add references, and then your statement of interest is for the virtuals, the VSFS, which is the Virtual Student Foreign Service. The statement of interest is probably the most important thing on your application. We highlight that and emphasize that so much, regardless of like what GPA you have, but what you're involved in, and then what you say in that statement of interest is like the high point of your application. In addition to that, the interview processes just really vary depending on where you're applying to. For me, I had a series of email exchanges. In addition to that, I did have a phone call interview. So.
Yeah, and again, the statement, make it sound like you. I know it's sort of weird to be applying to a government entity, but it's going to be people like me reading the application and reading your statement. Try to give yourself, your true personality. I don't know, back in the day when I was applying for things like this, I would think, I have to write in a very formal way because it's a government agency and I have to use a lot of big words. That's not what, the person in Washington reading 1,000 internship applications is going to want to see. They want to know a little bit about you, maybe something interesting or quirky about you, and why you want to do this. Not that you're checking a box on your resume, but that you have a passion for wildlife trafficking or women's rights or fighting international child abduction. So that's really what we're looking for. A little blood and guts. Good stuff. Okay, thank you very much. Enjoy your evening, and send me an email and we can meet if you need more information, or we can always talk on the phone.